Hey guys, what's up? This week I'm going to be talking about the Kingdom of Kush and their importance and their military, and more importantly, their archers. They had very famous archers called Kushite archers or Nubian archers, and they're some of the most well-renowned archers in the history of the world. My sources were history.gov, and then the website that the school provides, and then the Chicago, University of Chicago.edu is where I got most of my military information from. They had a full page about Nubian archers. So a little bit about the Kingdom of Kush. They were a kingdom south of Egypt in Nubia, on the Nile River. Very, very rich nation, lots of gold veins. They actually made King Tut's mask out of Nubian gold, so you can kind of see the importance of Nubia and the Kingdom of Kush. Kingdom of Kush was just the longest lasting kingdom in Nubia, so kind of connect those 2 points. They're at constant wars with Egypt, but they're also allies quite often. It was kind of a weird relationship between the two nations. At one point, Egypt owned the Kingdom of Kush. They had a pharaoh ruling it. And then eventually King Pi, P-I-Y-E, conquered Egypt. He led a very successful raid on Egypt and actually conquered and united the northern and southern part of Egypt together. And he ruled until the Assyrians from Iraq, or current day Iraq at least, conquered Egypt back. They were at constant war, and it was really hard on King Pi and the future pharaohs to be able to rule Egypt and the Kingdom of Kush at the same time. That's a lot of land to move soldiers from back then around, and they eventually lost Egypt. They retreated back to the Kingdom of Kush and just ruled their own one nation. They were the 25th dynasty, and then obviously this Assyrians were the 26th dynasty. But we're not talking about Egypt today. We're talking about the Kingdom of Kush. So their military, very, very strong military. They were hired as mercenaries all the time, especially the archers. The archers were a very, very expensive mercenary group to hire, but they were some of the strongest you could get. They used their typical swords and shield men. The shields were made out of wood and animal hide. Swords obviously went from iron to steel. They had spears and javelins, chariots that they got the idea of chariots from the Egyptians, from going to battle all the time with the Egyptians. The javelins were used to break shield walls as just a strong anti-shield weapon. Spears, obviously, to create some distance against swordsmen. Kind of the same old as most other nations. The one thing that made them different was their longbows. They used longbows, and they were very, very, very skilled archers. The only other nation, at least back at that day of time, or at least in the history of the world, that could compare was the Mongols. But the Mongols used short bows on horseback, whereas Nubians used longbows, and typically got in line formations instead. So completely different types of archery. They kind of used at least what we did with infantry, where we had some people down on knees, some people standing up with longbows, so you could kind of stack formations and just get a volley of arrows going on. They had very light arrows. Their arrows were very, very light, so they could carry hundreds of them at a time. They were just wood, and then they had a very small peak of steel at the very end of it, obviously to pierce skin, and shields. They used different techniques where they'd go on their knees or even both knees, and they would do something called the double draw technique, where they use both hands to draw back the string, kind of just create more power and force behind their shots. We don't have a lot of history of other nations doing that, so they were kind of one of the first countries to really start using that technique, at least that we know of. They would also be paired with cavalry units, so they'd be responsible for a specific cavalry unit, and they would have multiple groups of those. So those specific archers would be responsible for these specific cavalry units to give them aerial support of bows and arrows, and then they would also have units take on people from like the walls when they were doing sieges, would be responsible for units on the wall, like opposing archers or people running catapults or whatever else you had. So very well-designed military going on. Their bows were 2 meters long of wood, and then they would also use animal horns to kind of make it more flexible. So they had a very unique type of bow that they would utilize. And, with the light arrows combined with the bow, they were able to move lots of arrows around with a very strong, powerful shot. And they would use chariots to resupply on arrows during the war, so they were able to sit out there and have a very drawn out battle. And it was very hard to get to them because they'd be stacked in such strong units that opposing nations would send military units to try to go get to the back line, and it'd just be so difficult because of all the arrows raining down on them. It was pretty much impossible. So they kind of had a very nice system set up for battles, and that's why they were hired as mercenaries so often. for countries like Persia and Egypt was they would just hire the archers only and just have them come out behind the current nation, so Egypt's front line. They would just have the Nubian archers come out and just perform their typical stances and formations. And yeah, they were very expensive but very powerful mercenaries, and that's why the country lasted for over 1,300 years, was because of this military strength and what the archers provided for this nation. And yeah, I think it was just super interesting learning about them. I've heard about Nubia before, but I didn't do a lot of research into them. And finding out about their military strengths and being archers, I love archers. You know, a lot of like swordsmen and shieldmen back then were just slaves or farmers forced to do it, so they weren't very skilled. At least like we think from these movies that a lot of them were skilled, but in reality, a lot of them were just farmers and slaves that didn't even want to be in battle. Whereas archers were very skilled units back then that had a lot of technique and talent to their fighting. So, yeah, I always find an interest to archers, and knowing that Nubia has some of the most powerful and advanced archers in the history of the world just kind of drew my interest. And yeah, very strong country and very cool archery skills. Thank you.